Hello, everybody. Sorry for the spooky intro, but you can see it's brightening up already. So I was just thinking, fear would not be a factor in a mindless creature. The fear that we feel that we can't explain is always explainable by some mechanism by which our ancestors learned instinctively, and it was patterned into their epigenetic behavior, and eventually became them. And thus our fear is an aspect of our intelligence. However, we also must recognize and control it in order not to be controlled by it, and that is a major purpose of religion, especially things like Zen. Zen is about suppressing the instincts and the passions, and it's based off of Buddhism, which is in my opinion, monotheistic, though atheistic in word, nature by which all passions and dispassions are connected in one small realization, conceptualization. And there's a variety of different ways it's interpreted, but my favorite is Chon/Zen, moved through Canton and then up into Japan. And through the intellectual processes of Japan being excellent statists and having the highest problem-solving aptitude of any people on the planet, up until, the massive amount of poisonings that took place, the entirety of Japan has the same amount of pesticides and herbicides as all of China. That's not going to bode well. It's already very bad for their health, like heart problems, brain problems, circulation problems, very rampant in Japan. And they blame genetics, but it's mostly caused by the chemical leaching into them and disrupting their natural systems by making their body rheumatic. Rheumatism is a very broad term, but it basically means the lack of recognition of a self. And in the immune system, that's where you get random or rheumatic inflammation. It's when the body's immune system attacks its own cells as if it were a foreign entity, because it doesn't recognize good or bad, it only recognizes like or foreign. And cancer is a lack of the body's death cycle triggering in a particular place. So and people who don't know germ theory probably have no idea, how that works, and just think that poxes are the work of fairies and sprites. And you know what? Fine. If you want to believe that, fine. I'm not gonna jump into your house and lay down a bunch of books and be like, no, you need to learn this. I'm gonna be your tutor for the next couple of months. If you want to believe in sprites and fairies, be my guest. But there's more of a conceptualization around the microbes in science that actually does kind of explain fairies and sprites and the other world. So, back on Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism is a lot like Catholicism and Christianity. It built up very, very hard to attack castles. It took a lot of sacrifice from its members, but they did it willingly because they had a conceptualization of strength and defense inside of their religion, which is a synthesis. However, there is also the monastic orthodox form, which is more like Mahayana Buddhism, which is very hard to find in the real world because, well, throughout modern history, especially after the Industrial Revolution, because it's very easy to attack and very easy to dismantle if you have more power than it, and most people do have more power than fully spiritual religions. And thus, the sort of backtracking of state-synthesized religions like Bushido are ultimately how that was brought forward into survival. Mahayana is a lot like monasticism or anchoritism, and it resembles a lot Bogolomilism, which I talked about in the past, who were early iconoclastic patrician Christians, or even Quakers. As I've also talked about, Quakers being ultimate pacifists who were also somewhat iconoclastic and demanded people reject passions. That's very, very close to Mahayana Buddhism. And, these religions are very important for coping with all the pain in the world, and especially with moving forward through time, of which there's a shifting baseline for how, happy and satisfied and mentally sound people are in that movement. And thus a ever-evolving religion, such as the relatively new Christianity and relatively new Buddhism, is important for overcoming the legitimate destruction of the environment of paganism, totemism, animism, or even the ancient fetishism, which is, well, let's not talk about that. I wouldn't actually call that a spiritual revolution as much as a cultural philosophy by which the human form is given artistic representation, and thus people can see themselves outside of themselves. It's a very early mechanism by which people practice out-of-body experiences, essentially, and seeing themselves in others, which is empathy, which is a faction of charisma. Really, it's something that you need to work very hard on. It's something that you have to structure yourself, and charisma is the generation of passion on the spot in such a way that is fully controlled, usually, and has almost surgical effect on your interaction with people and your interpersonal interactions. So how a lot of people can cope with the pain of a world where even the more modern religions have had their environments wiped out, I have noticed, is through comedy, through absurdity. There is an easy way of turning on its head the spikes of the earth, and that's by laughing at its squishy butt. And so and I'm not a major comedian, although when I get into a flow state, I can very easily make people I'm interacting with laugh. The millennials that chose comedy ended up being some of the most successful out of our generation because they helped people, live and survive and thrive with the extinction after Vatican II of Catholicism, and thus the Protestant contrast ceased to be, and thus all the Christian religions collapsed, and you see a collapse of Hinduism, and you see a collapse of Buddhism, and see a collapse of Shintoism. That's not good. Our current Pope, Francis, he's very smart. He has very smart friends. He's evil. He's extremely evil. But he is very surgical when it comes to what he chooses to say. And one of the things that he's doing is getting traditional Catholics that reject a lot of the things that he says to hate other religions by flattening out the differences and saying that they're exactly like you. Well, people instinctively fill in the blank and go, no, they're not. Because that's true. They're not. No two things alike. No two different thing is alike, but there's tons of similarities, and that's exactly what he's pointing out. The fact that there is a golden tether that all the religions, holy men, have enjoyed, and that connection is the bridge to God, and thus you can pull down, and this is exactly how language was invented, through religious experience. You can pull down wisdom. There's not really a word for that prophetic connection, and you can share it with people, and sometimes you end up being 400, 500 years ahead of the standard. But who knows if that standard would have been standardized if it wasn't for that prophecy. And thus, the holy people of all the world's cultures sit on the top specifically because, though it's very hard to parse some of these mystical, awakened messages, there is something there. Unlike with, these fake gurus of the modern age who talk about like Kundalini crap and trying to sell people gimmicks like little trinkets and charms. That's a bunch of BS. I don't subscribe to the if you can't beat 'em, join 'em philosophy. As soon as I find something that's immoral, put my finger up, I find the consensus. If there's even like 60%, or if there's even like 40% of the consensus, I'll march against it. But if it's something like a lot of the things that I see in modern America that's like 20, 15, 10% in my backyard and sort of negative behavior, I don't march on things that have a mandate because I don't waste the energy that I could be spending parsing the more delicate arguments. Ultimately, you gotta tack into the future and set things up for success in the future instead of chasing down the instantaneous failures that have been set up by the past. It's ultimately one of the ways that you actually live in the present is by calculating these things. And thus, to live in the present is to calculate, put your finger up to the wind, and then find the right direction to move instead of moving in the wrong direction. Kiwi Farm's biggest problem is its loudest members. And it's very ironic that they like to talk about dunning-kruger effect, or at least they did at one point. Because I have witnessed the worst members of Kiwi Farms being hyper-confident about everything that they think they know and rejecting wholesale everything that they don't. And thus, they're locked in, probably from a teenage year. Conceptualization philosophy of the world is always there to be reaffirmed, and that's exactly how you get thought leaders that are just saying the laziest possible things that people already want to hear, like the carnivore diet, which is literally the easiest scam that you can employ in the dietary field, because who doesn't want to eat meat? Meat is the tastiest thing. And throughout history, meat has been a sign of luxury. However, different people have different dietary requirements. Different blood types have different dietary requirements. And so you'd need a personal trainer in order to find out what's the best for you, just like you would need that to find out what the best way for you to fight is. Maybe you're a little bit shorter. Maybe you want to go for more taekwondo. Maybe you're a little bit taller and lankier. Maybe you want to go BJJ. Maybe you're very, very strong and you want to try, boxing, something like that. It doesn't apply across the board. Like nothing applies across the board, because that's to be an egalitarian squarehead and just completely and utterly ignore the scientific process and lock in and go, this is how it is. And that's dunning-kruger effect, to say Marx was right, Marx was right, Marx was right, Marx was right, read Marx, read Marx, read Marx. That's dunning-kruger effect, because you read him and you're like, this guy's an idiot and he's lying. And you read Kiwi Farms and you go, these guys are idiots and they're lying about a lot of shit. But then you read into the pages and you see completely different people who are just there collecting knowledge, passing it on. They got it all over different forums, all over different websites. I myself have watched the work be done off-site for most of my life. And I've seen it. There are people all over the place that are in independent groups that are actually gathering this information, and they will pass it along via DM groups of any social media, and they don't need Kiwi Farms as a landing page, especially when the owner is looking at people's IPs and doing a bunch of creepy stuff and to collect money for his little swamp vacation. A lot of the people on Kiwi Farms that think that it's generated there and are very excited about the website, they just lack object permanence. You know, they legitimately see it, and then that's when the first time that it has manifested itself, because that's the first time they've seen it, you see. Another factor of dunning-kruger effect is not asking, where did this come from? Once again, neo-Nazis, they recognize that World War II wasn't right? So they step in and they go, well, that was bad. And so they say the bad guys won in World War II. But they don't equate the Masons forming Prussia as a complete and utter destruction of many, many native German cultures and a diminishing of the German Confederacy as a whole. Because they do not bother with history, because they lack object permanence, because they've had dunning-kruger since they've been a young man. This is usually more common with men, by the way. And there's your sign. There's your problem. There's your leak. See it right there. Just like with the sheriffs who can pocket excess money out of the county at the end of the year. There's your leak. It's right there. And that I've seen on kiwi farms drive out so many good people for nothing. For nothing. That's the key thing. I would legitimately love to put on a chalkboard, and here's what they accomplish. But no, the dunning-kruger lack of object permanence babies that are hooting and hollering on kiwi farms are literally less successful than Ralph and literally more annoying than Fuentes. So, speaking of which, ha 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 ha. I've been praying for Fuentes to lose his lunch for a long time. He's a real enemy of the burgeoning traditional Catholic revival, the rejection of the Second Ecumenical Council, which is a rejection of Christ's teachings in general. So the Irish people are a lovely, lovely race. We are very, proud, and we tend to be very strong, and we tend to be very thick-headed. And I loved reading a book called Irish Wisdom in the Pyramids. It is so funny. And what's crazy is this came before any other book that I can find where African American or otherwise black people say that they have built everything. The We Was Kings movement that the black Israelites propagate and have been probably using AI. That's probably where Google's AI thing came from, is just black Israelites on there constantly doing wee wasery, and then everything ends up, trained into such. And there's where that little freak out came from. But I guessed that pretty quickly about what that was. But Irish Wisdom in the Pyramids is such a funny book. It literally says that Irish people invented everything, that Irish people were the seed of Abraham, that Irish people, created all the world's languages. It's so funny, because it's tapping into the old Indo-European thing, and it's also connecting Christianity, but it's also saying that Irish people built the pyramids. It's super funny. I would strongly suggest finding that audiobook on Culane Ruled by Venus channel. Or if you can find a book, collect that. That is a collector's book right there. That is a very, very funny book to be brought to parties and read. We Irish people were the first people to discover, to hunt for the word gullible on the ceiling. to discover the stain on our shirt. Well, speaking of parties, actually, the coolest things happen outside of parties because there's no pressure, Parties have too much pressure. And, the coolest things, at least in my life, happen way outside of parties. Now, there was one time when, for my birthday, I threw a big party at Sweet, Country Inn and Suite, on the very top, when my friend was working there. And I invited all my friends, and they invited friends, and we filled up, this entire level at the very top and raged out. And basically, I spent the vast majority of the night in hot tub and shared it with a very beautiful girl for a period of time. Nothing risque though. Just have a good time. But parties aren't for me. Unless I'm throwing the party, parties aren't for me. Drug addiction is a tragedy when you have life to live, right? Because when you've had a drug addiction and you're looking back on life, you're just like, wow, things are worse, because you see the shifting baseline. And then, you go, oh, I wasted that time when things were better, and now the opportunities that were there are gone. But you know what? When it happens inside of an artificial environment filled with everything that makes you upset, it's a comedy. And thus, it's a release. And that's exactly why people in big cities have such massive draws to drug addiction. It's because everybody's just laughing. Nobody's helping. Nobody's crying. And it is what it is. And you know what? To say it is what it is about the most honest thing anybody can say. Video games ruin lodges, Masonic lodges and their little stag party groups, and the crap that they say, oh, you join us, you can get a nice cheap lobster and steak. But that's not as fun as being able to sit in comfort around your objects and near your family and play in a guild on a video game and do cool stuff for your guild and interact with people and, maybe start your own and, just have fun with normal people instead of these freaks that just wish to humiliate people in the Masons. And I'm very happy that as time passes, I see less and less Masons, I see less and less Confederates. That makes me very happy. I hope more people funnel into the Trump, make America great again movement from the Masons and the Confederates, and they drop that crap and they say, you know what, release the crush my balls on the shelf. Who cares? And then they just move forward, because it's what's done is done. They already made those decisions, but they can move forward. They don't have to be paralyzed by fear. Who cares? Everybody's flawed. Everybody has some secret, but you don't have to kill to keep it. Who cares? Now, if you do have to kill to keep it, it's probably because your secret's really, really shitty. And you're probably a really, really shitty person. Just saying. So if you are a really, really shitty person and you do have a secret that you kill to keep that in the wraps and try to be a good person so you don't end up more and more paranoid and, shot out. Please. Thank you. A big fat portion of Greg Abbott's wiki looks a lot like the USSR wiki, I noticed. She's like, he's valedictorian. He was voted most likely. He wasn't valedictorian. He was most likely to succeed by a little group. And then he joined the Young Republicans. And then he was very successful. And Delta, Tau, Delta. Oh, gosh. We got the Texas FDR up here making Israel great again. How wonderful. And DeSantis basically copied off of his homework. So if you want to know real bad guy is over in Texas. As I said, I'd rather live in Detroit than Texas. I'd much rather live in Chicago than Texas, even if I get shot by drill artists. Oh, gosh. Hawk Tuah is a sign of complete desperation in society. It's not only a complete sign of... It's really not a sign of complete desperation in society, because most people didn't really care. But it's a complete desperation in, mimetic corporate culture, that Allegria style that tried to condense memes, which are ever-churning representation of how people are thinking, into their own control mechanism, into their own condensed algorithm. Didn't work. But Hawk Tuah Girl was a grinder, and so she ended up way better than most people her age. She took that and she recognized the opportunity, and the selective pressure of the younger generations has made it such that, she jumped on board immediately. She was very intelligent and recognized her opportunity. And so no hate for Hawk Tuah Girl, even though she's gonzo. Everybody else did a crypto poll, China could have gone a variety of different ways. I was just thinking about this while I was watching the Red Hawks video, a newer video. It was a Long Shong video. It could have been from Thailand, Thai culture. If Long Shong, like in his new video, took over China. Could have been Thai China. Although I'm pretty sure he culture shifted. I can't quite remember that first part. I was writing. Or it could have been in the north. The Mongol Shun Empire could have, continued to assert, which it did, continue to assert its dominance over, which the Mongols did, over China. Or it could have been the Theravadan Dalians in the West, living out in the highlands with their tea. Those were interesting kind of warrior priests with shaved heads. And that's why I like to call them Dalians. From Dali. But instead, it was the Han. It was the Han who hate Hmong. And I gotta say, racism is dumb. Broken branch. Ancestor cry. But one thing I'm wondering, what the hell happened to Korea? You know, for real. Like, Korea used to be major. Korea is a very venerable culture, but they just collapsed out, you know. It's very sad what happened in Korea. And I haven't studied the Korean War very much, but I think what happened in the Korean War is we lost, and then we, like, you know, didn't talk about it forever, and then just moved on to the Vietnam War, which we also lost. Those were not good wars. Everything was very murky after 1965. And you know, that's exactly when the Second Ecumenical Council happened, and Catholicism got busted apart. That's exactly when the Church of Wicca was founded. That's exactly when the Church of Satan was founded, and a horrendous amount of other little spin-off shoot-offs. Poor Korea. Oh well. Pray for Korea. Take care.